Next Curve.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Next Curve's reThink webcast. And you know what? This year, we're going big with webcasts. Got a new program going on here with a number of series on key topics in the world of technology and innovation that matter, of course. I mean, because that's all we want to talk about, stuff that matters. We don't really have a lot of time to talk about anything else. But today, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Mark Vena of SmartTech Research. How's it going, Mark?
Leonard, good morning, good afternoon, good day, whatever. You're in my time zone, so I can't.
Yeah, no, exactly. I have no idea where you're going with that.
I don't know where I'm going with that. I did 2 podcasts before this one, so it's
there. You go. Yeah,
podcast.
Yeah, popular guy. But anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about WWDC, which happened, I think it was like a week and a half ago now. Yes. Time flies, so it's really difficult to tell. But, I think we've had a bit of time to absorb the news and the sound bites that came out of that event. But before we get into that, hey, Mark, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself as well as your research firm. And then let's get into it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Leonard, for the opportunity. Name again is Mark Vena. I have headed up as the lead head Principal Analyst and CEO of SmartTech Research, which has been around for about 5.5 years. And I come at things, in a very conversational, deliberate manner. You talked about, hey, the Vision Pro, the WWDC, it's been a week and a half. I sometimes think you need the benefit of time to digest something before you start commenting on it. We'll get into that in a second. But I come out of the classic consumer technology category. 10 years with Compaq. I was one of the original members of the Presario brand team that came up with the consumer brand of PCs called Presario, which they take that for granted today. But that in the day there was no such thing as a consumer brand PCs. 7 or 8 years with Dell, at the time Compaq's mortal enemy. Ran marketing at Alienware after Alienware was acquired by Dell. And so about 20 years roughly in the PC space, but a lot of consumer technology. My firm dabbles into other areas beyond consumer tech because it's hard to divorce stuff like IoT and infrastructure and wireless and connectivity from those areas. But a lot of consumer tech, that's my favorite because it's close to my heart. Yeah. And I do a very popular, what I think is a popular podcast called the SmartTech Check podcast. That's I do a couple times a week. I got to have you on my podcast, by the way.
Okay, anytime.
I got to do. But anyway, I'm glad to be here with you chatting about WWDC.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to doing this with you because I consider you one of the experts in Apple. And you and I have had several conversations about Apple, their strategy, their approach to market, as well as their technologies. And so I think this is going to be a great conversation. But I also want to tell the audience, this guy writes really well. I read your stuff. It's really thoughtful.
You're too generous, Leonard. You're too generous.
No. I actually don't say this about a lot of folks. That's not to say that I'm a bad guy, but I dish out these kind of adulations in a very measured way, and so make sure to check out his podcast and as well as his research. So let's get into it. WWDC 2023. I'm going to let you start. What do you think, man?
Well, my first impression for the first hour and 20 minutes, to be honest with you, and I timed it specifically, is that I thought they were going to do a head fake. They were going through all the perfunctory stuff you would expect. Yeah. The enhancements to iOS, the enhancements to Mac OS. I was disappointed with one thing on Mac OS. We'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
They talked about upgrade a lot of enhancements that are kind of what I call rinse and repeat. Certainly things that are not going to be that are not interesting, but they don't necessarily move the needle. I mean, certainly things that didn't say, I got to run out and buy a new Mac, or I got to buy a new iPad. So there was a lot of things to like. They've introduced FaceTime to tvOS, which I think is kind of cool. That brings the FaceTime experience in the living room. If you're a big FaceTime aficionado, and there's a lot of people that are. Specific to macOS, and we'll just talk about this for a second. The one feature that I just cannot believe, it'll probably come down the pipe because, Apple, as you know, they'll talk about 25 or 30 things per operating system because they just have so much. They don't only have so much time during WWDC. But then behind the scenes, they'll say, by the way, we're introducing 300 features, but we're only talking about 30. So maybe this feature will be one of them. And one of the things they have not introduced, they have it on OS 16 with regards to FaceTime, and that is eye gaze correction. Now, and believe it or not, there is no good eye correction capability on the entire macOS platform. I've tried, I've researched it. And there's a couple of really great solutions on the Windows side. And as you can see, I'm looking at you, and my eyes right now look as if they're looking at the screen. Right. And when you're doing a podcast, or you're doing work from home work where you want to be, you're on a Zoom call and you don't want to think your eyes are going off the screen and distracting as if you're watching, it would be a great capability to have. They have it for FaceTime. Most people don't even know it, but if you go into the FaceTime app, you can turn it on or off. It defaults to on. Right. But I think it's a great feature, and I was disappointed that they didn't introduce that. But getting back to the WWDC, do you feel that way? I mean,
no, I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you 1,000%. So
I thought the thing that was interesting, and we're going to get into Vision Pro in a little while, is that they waited to an hour and 20 minutes into it, and I really thought, oh my God, they're not going to talk about it. This will be the biggest tech fate of 2023, but then they dedicated the rest of the presentation to it. And we'll get into that in a second. But I wasn't, maybe it's me. I went to a WWDC a few years ago where they introduced, it was so fun. You might have probably been at this WWDC. It was at the San Jose Convention Center downtown. And the audience doesn't get this, but when you're at a live Apple event, this was before the pandemic, and you have 1,500 or 2,000 Apple aficionados, wannabes that they love being in that experience. I want to say it was either Phil Schiller or Jaws got up and talked about, we're going to introduce the ability for when your Mac goes asleep, if it knows that it's after, if it looks at your time zone and knows that it's nighttime out, it'll automatically turn off the screensaver and darken it. And that got almost a standing round of applause. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, you have to have an appreciation for the Apple zealots. And a lot of the other things they announced, with regard to the operating systems of the different iterations, were interesting. You probably had a couple of things that caught your eye, but they didn't, I didn't say to myself, well, wow, I got to go out and buy a new Mac or a new iPad or a new iPhone. So we'll see. No, I agree. I mean, the one thing that I thought was really interesting, and there's a lot of folks who, after the event said, well, how come Apple didn't say anything about AI? Where's their Gen AI story? And I think, Tim Cook at the last earnings call famously, responded to one of the analysts by saying, hey, look, we're going to take a thoughtful approach. We're going to be a bit cautious about Gen AI. But the fact of the matter is they did make a Gen AI statement, and that had to do with autocorrect. And I think this kind of it maybe flew over the heads of a lot of folks. No,
but
I think to your point, I think it was under the radar. Absolutely.
But for sure, I mean, their transition toward support for on-device transformer models and enhancing autocorrect and likely other functions on device, I think is a huge statement. And probably just as profound as anything else that's been put out there. But, what I think is going to be a big question is with the next version of iOS, as well as Mac OS and iPad OS, how far back does that support go? I mean, what are we looking at in terms of generations of devices that can then now leverage or run these transformer models locally to benefit from these improved Gen AI capabilities? And I think, to me, that was the thing that kind of stuck out. But it was almost like, okay, how come you guys didn't go out and put out like a huge slide that said Gen AI? But that's not their.
But let me make an observation about that, because I think it's a very salient point. The thing that impresses me about Apple, and I think the way that they'll approach Gen AI, as you know, I am terrified of what's going on right now with Gen AI type of applications. I think I'm very supportive of the technology. I think there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of benefits. We could have 10 podcasts about the benefits.
Right.
Fear that I have is that there are companies running amok right now with applications without thinking through the implications.
Yes.
And it's like an arms race right now. I've never seen anything like it. This is not 1999 or 2000 with the birth of the internet or the monetization of the internet. This is far beyond that. And there's a lot of companies that have not thought through the privacy issues, the issues around how do you differentiate between deep fake content and content that hasn't been touched. That terrifies me. And I was at a major, I'm not going to even say who it was because then I'll get into trouble, a major silicon company early in the week, and that announced a new silicon that will play in that space. And I asked their leadership team, what capabilities are you going to be putting in place to make sure that people can distinguish? And they gave me kind of an arms race answer. Well, we make the silicon, and the device makers are going to have to take on that responsibility, or the people who write the apps, but we have a committee working what our policy should be. Well, maybe you should have had the committee work the policy, what it's going to be, before you announce the capability. So getting back to Apple, I think Apple will be very deliberate about this because they know there are risks associated with it. They do not want an association that builds around Apple where, hey, I have the iPhone 15 or 16 down the road, and I created some really great deep fake content that you cannot tell real versus non-real. And I think starting with autocorrection, I think is first of all, it's a problem that needs to be resolved.
Exactly.
We all know. I mean, most people have sent a lot of nasty text messages erroneously because it autocorrected the wrong way. So I applaud them because I think at the end of the day, I think they took it very under the radar, but very important
in a very subtle way. And I guess, and I think there was a huge statement they made by taking that approach, and I liked it. I thought it was slick. Now I do also want to give credit to Qualcomm though, because I mean, a lot of the stuff Qualcomm's been talking about, and of course, Apple comes in and steals their thunder in a way, right? I mean, but it's good to see that from the mobile side, on the mobile front, whether it's from Apple or non-Apple parts of the overall mobile computing ecosystem, that they're really, taking this security, what I call confidential AI kind of approach. And they've been pioneering a lot of this stuff. And so I think there has to be a lot of credit given to the likes of Apple, Qualcomm, and others that are looking at, how do we now evolve Gen AI in a way that is private, is confidential, and I think more importantly, as you're alluding to, safe, right? Yes. Because like what you're saying, I totally agree with you. It's like, people are just going nuts over this stuff. It's absolutely risky.
It's insane. The speed of which all this stuff is going on. And you mentioned Qualcomm. Qualcomm has such a strategic long-term presence in smartphones. I know they get it. I've had conversations with their leadership team, as I'm sure you have. I think we're going to be seeing some leadership on their behalf saying, here's how a silicon company should behave in this brave new world. And it can't be, I'm washing my hands. Whoever uses our technology, it's their responsibility.
Right. Yeah. And if anything, it's just a reinforcement of this thesis that AI at the edge is going to be as important, if not more important, than what's happening in the data center, and so, these concepts of hybrid AI all of these things I think are going to be advancing and will, I think, in a lot of ways challenge what is kind of like the prevailing conventional thinking about generative AI, which is all done in the data center. But having a player like Apple kind of make that sort of subtle statement, I think was kind of big. But anyways, we're spending a lot of time on that. What are maybe a couple of other impressions that you had coming out of the event, and then we'll move on to that head fake.
I thought that in terms of at a macro level, in terms of big announcements that normally, like let's say take Mac OS.
Yeah,
I think the pace of innovation from a Mac operating system standpoint is probably slowing down a bit. At the end of the day, how much more can you do? Of course, Apple might disagree with that, but it was a relatively low-key announcement in terms of features that really jumped out at me. There was some interesting health stuff that Apple announced on the iOS side that I thought was interesting. I thought the visual FaceTime capability where, I've been kind of thinking that, hey, that's kind of interesting. Someone calls me, I can't get to the call. They can leave a video voicemail. That's really cool. And by the way, these are all little things that I think I would put in the category of, hey, this is why you're in the Apple ecosystem. Yeah, you pay you pay a penalty a premium a bit to be in that vaunted ecosystem. But here are some of the benefits. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, I think the big news, which we probably want to get, unless you have some commentary about on the non-Vision Pro stuff.
Can I hit on a couple?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I agree with you. One of the things I think, obviously, Apple does immensely well is all that continuity stuff, right? The seamless experiences and collaboration. I think that's a communication and collaboration between devices. And so some of the new collaboration features I thought were just continue to position Apple in a unique and advantaged way. And so when you talk about ecosystem, that's a huge, I think, part of the gravity that the ecosystem has is that harmony that they're able to establish within across different user experiences and device experiences. The other thing that I thought was really cool and timely, and I'll explain why when we get into the head fake, is the introduction of the new Apple Silicon Mac Pro. Now, that thing is actually pretty beastly. I think it has a max configuration on memory side of 192 gigabytes.
Unbelievable.
That's on par
with baby out. That thing is like a rocket ship. Yeah, no.
Yeah, so we're talking about unified memory, and I think there's the memory bandwidth is actually pretty massive. I think it's pretty close to 900 gigabits, almost a terabit per second. So, for a single die, we're talking about some massive capability. And, one of the things that makes it different from what we're seeing on the server side with some of the server players is, this is a heterogeneous compute, processor, right? It can support all kinds of different types of workloads. And so I think it's a really interesting direction that Apple has set. But more importantly, introducing this, M2 Ultra into the Pro line now makes it it's like it makes everything complete. So in terms of tool chains now and devices to support that tool chain, you have like an entire Apple stack from watches all the way to production workstation servers. So I thought that was really cool. And then, on the software end of things, if you went beyond the devices and you actually looked at what they're doing with the tools, they're really starting to put those tools together where I even think NVIDIA needs to be a bit worried, quite honestly.
Well, what was interesting on the Mac Pro, because Mac Pro, again, is a relatively small audience. It's a it's a professional grade
Pro
Mac computer. It's not for your mother sending emails to her friends. It's really something for a graphics illustrator for really, really, really high powered content professionals, people who work at Disney those type of companies.
Absolutely.
But what was intriguing to me, because the Mac Pro has been kind of like the neglected Mac, because it took them so long to refresh it. What shocked me was, people's eyes lit up. Oh, this is a box that has PCI slots and some expandability. Doesn't work with third-party graphics cards, and only works with PCI-based storage cards. And that kind of really, I was bewildered by that. But that tells me that Apple feels that from a graphics architecture standpoint, they don't need NVIDIA anymore. They don't need AMD, which is really what they used to utilize. They still
right.
If you've got an Intel PC, you can leverage their external GPUs with AMD cards.
Right.
But I was a bit surprised at that, because at the end of the day, how much internal storage do you need? I mean, the Mac Studio, which I think is a very nice compact form factor. That's that has ultra support. And all I know is, I guess my point is, I'm not sure I really understand the need of having a lot of internal storage in the form factor itself, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong.
Pros are interesting folks.
Yeah.
With interesting requirements that drive interesting hardware. If you were, come on, man, you're like Alienware. You know how the gamers are.
Yes, I do.
Kind of
I do.
Eccentric bunch, right, to say the least. So and again, on the software side and tooling side, a lot of interesting stuff. Reality Composer Pro, they're introducing that. A lot of folks are saying, we had a recent chat. They're being like Omniverse using USD. Well, there's USDX, and Apple is a pioneer of all this stuff, with their legacy with Pixar. So now, let's get into the head fake. As you call it.
Well, again, and by the way, I'm not the only one who had that feeling. I said that to a few people. The thing, and I had some very prominent reporters that I work with that said, "Well, we thought this was going to be a waste of time. Why were we on this call for 2 hours?" But the thing is, my thoughts about Vision Pro is this: give Apple credit for thinking about this in a brand new way. The Vision Pro is not an accessory. At $3,500, it can't be an accessory.
Better not be.
And we'll talk about pricing in a second.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that the 7, 8 years, depending on how you want to kind of handicap it, that they've taken to get from the drawing board to a product that's now in the market, is that it was a very well thought out plan. This is a platform, just like an iPhone or a tablet or a Mac computer is. So that's very refreshing when you consider the way that Meta approaches it and others approach it, which is more of an accessory-driven way. Yeah. I think there's a number of very reasonable and non-sci-fi. Well, it's sci-fi because it's 3D, but there's a number of usage models that you could say very easily, I could see using that. For example, something as simple as I'm using my MacBook and I want to put a virtual display in the virtual window, where instead of being confined to a 14 or 15-inch MacBook display, which I was, by the way, a week before the show, editing a video, and that's an adventure. Anybody who's done any type of multi-window application like video editing, doing that on a single screen in your hotel room is not wonderful.
True.
If I could put 2 or 3 75-inch, 100-inch high definition 4K like displays in a virtual window, I can only imagine what that might be. There's virtual FaceTime, which I thought was interesting, that I think the mainstream audience could appreciate. The entertainment applications are interesting. The people I know who have used it so far for that brief amount of time, they allowed people to use it, and it was a very small number of folks. Apparently, I got some feedback that it's so immersive, it's almost too immersive. It's almost too compelling. So that to me is very, very interesting. And I'll just sum it up by saying, we'll talk, because we're going to talk about the price point in a second. But I really think that giving the App Store 6 months not the App Store, but the developers 6 months to develop a killer app. Yeah. Kind of like, and I wrote about this, coming up with a Lotus 123, I've just dated myself, which was an app that put the IBM PC on the Mac, because at the time it was the only, that was before clones came out. It was the only platform. Oh, yeah.
I'm dating myself.
Yes. Well, you get it. You get it.
I get it. Yeah. No, I do. I do. No. And I think those are good perspectives that you're sharing there. I personally was kind of disappointed initially, because this is not what I expected Apple to do. I didn't get it initially, just because, it didn't matter. I mean, we'll get to price point later, but to me, the price point didn't matter. It didn't matter how much stuff you loaded into a device like this, because, one of the things that you and I are probably jaded, because we experience these kind of devices all the time. We have vendors, we have component makers, we have everybody in our community engaging with this technology and the devices. So we've kind of seen everything, and I didn't necessarily think that this was solving any problems in a big way. Okay. And I think that's one of the things that this device needed to do. And just so that everyone's really clear on what this device is, the Vision Pro is really a VR device, right? They call it it has a pass-through thing that allows you to see your surroundings, but in effect, the reason why it looks like goggles is because it's basically a VR headset, right? Call it MR, mixed reality. Okay. And, we've already had Lenovo, HTC, and others come to market with these type of devices already. So, yes. Okay. It has a wonderful micro LED OLED display, two of them that are 4K that combine to something like 6K or 7K or whatever. And yeah, it's going to deliver some great visuals, but is that something differentiated and unique that solves a huge problem? I didn't feel like it did, because if you throw enough money at a device, you can get to something like a Vision Pro. Now, one of the things I think is an interesting head fake is the fact that the whole VR world is moving toward industrial, right? And then Apple all of a sudden comes out, introduces this thing, and then instead of being a pair of AR glasses, which is really what I thought they're going to come to market with, they're introducing a VR-ish or more of a VR-ish device, pointing straight at the consumer, right? And so I think that's the interesting head fake. But I think I don't know, with any kind of introduction of what they consider a pivotal device, there's always a bigger picture, right? And I think after chewing on the press releases and watching the keynote several times more, I think there is definitely a bigger picture here, and a large part of that is expressed in that, or a hint of that is in that 3D special camera. That thing is very, very, I think, unique. Yeah. And important, because it allows people to be creators, and the content has always been the problem. And there's nothing more personal than the content that we all generate. In fact, with our smartphones, we probably generate more. We probably view and share more of our own content than we do any produced content, third-party content, right? And I think that's brilliant, Mark. I think that's brilliant. And I don't think any of the other guys have really solved that problem. They've been so game-centric, thinking that gaming is going to be the thing.
And that's the challenge, because listen, if AR and VR has had any success in the last 5 or 7 years, it's really been on the industrial and corporate side, where it's had some traction chiefly with Oculus and Quest and the Meta stuff, has been on the gaming side. So it has kind of a perception with people who have not bought into the vision yet. No pun intended, according to the vision. But for those people, when they think of AR goggles or VR goggles, they think of gaming. And by the way, there's not, I mean, yes, there's some aficionados that love that type of gaming experience. And I'm not saying that's not a market. It's not a mainstream market. But I will say, and you brought it up, is that you got to give Apple credit in that they're concerned about, from an industrial design standpoint, it's a see-through product, meaning that when you're not using it in some type of virtual screen mode, you can actually see through the display. I think that is a tip of the hat to the people who are concerned about isolation, because apparently the experience is so overwhelming. Right. Yeah. You know, there's going to be a lot of, by the way, can you imagine the SNL skits? They're going to be on this thing. Yeah. When SNL comes back on the air. But I will say that right now, if no killer application emerges, and I'm mature enough to say I don't know what that killer app is. I think it's going to be something in the video conferencing area, probably beyond what they showed with that VR version of FaceTime, where you think you're actually in the room with the other person. They didn't really show that. They showed a variation of that. But I just think that there's going to be some type of killer app that someone's going to come along and says, you know what, this thing is $3,500, but I can't do it without having that level of hardware. And let's face it, this whole category, which Apple likes to call spatial computing, you're literally putting a computer on your head. Let's face that. Now, we're going to be the naysayers about the price point. We'll probably talk about that for a minute.
We need to talk about that because we keep bringing it up.
The battery only lasts 2 hours. And they showed it to someone using it on a plane. I'm not sure I buy into that.
I do.
I would never. I might use it on a plane because people are not likely to steal it. I wouldn't use it on the New York City subway system.
No.
Or AirPod Maxes for that matter.
Right.
But let's talk about price point because we just got a few minutes left here.
But I want to say that I think you did in our previous conversation before we hit the record button here. I think you did hit on a killer application, which is grandparents.
Yes.
Or people who are immobile, who want to experience their family in a immersive fashion. And so going back to tying the device with the content creation.
To a demographic, yes.
Right. And then
and on that point, keep in mind that someone who is a shut-in or has limited mobility in a elderly home, so to speak, they'll routinely spend $4,000 or $5,000 on a a battery-powered cart to drive around because they want mobility. This thing is going to be $3,500. And will give that people that level degree of freedom without ever leaving their home or their place of residence. So I think that is going to be an important market.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something right now. I'm so interested in this 3D spatial camera because one of the things that we realized is that two-dimensional photos don't capture people. There's this whole idea of photogenic people. Well, I think most of us are photo inaccurate, right? Or because it just doesn't capture the person, the way they look and feel that they might appear in more of an immersive volumetric content format. And if Apple delivers on that in a compelling way, I'm telling you, that is the thing that made me think, you know what, this would be great if we can we can buy one of these things, get a few to our family in South Korea, and they can experience nephews.
No question about that. And remember, $3,500. If you adjust that for inflation based on some of the products that became big hits 25 years ago, it's really not that expensive. If you make that comparison to the original cell phone, the original iPhone PC. And what's interesting about this, Leonard, is that, and I had a lot of this feedback at this conference that I was at earlier in the week, where some very esteemed analysts, who I have tremendous respect for, so I'm not going to mention their name on the podcast. Well, even if they sell 250,000, it's going to be a small part of their business. If they sell 250,000, it's $1 billion business. How many companies, only Apple, could have raised the bar to such a degree that if it's not a $10 billion business right out of the gate, it's not that interesting. So all long journeys start with a single step. And I will defend Apple to the degree is that, they want to deliver a knockout immersive experience. And this is one of the few Apple announcements, and I said this to you the other day, this is one of the few Apple announcements that there hasn't been any chatter about, it's kind of underpowered. Oh, it's not going to be able to have the horsepower to perform these different applications. Normally you would hear that. I think they made a decision in Cupertino that basically said, you know what? We may get knocked around a little bit on the price point, but we're going to make sure, because price points come down. We control the silicon, so we can take some margin and cost out of the product over time. There's no question that they have a roadmap right now that they're showing products probably a couple of years from now at, let's say, under $2,000. Ultimately, they get under $1,000, which I think we really see a lot of volume with. So I'm not really that bothered by the price point. And I do think that they're going to sell a couple 100,000 without trying too hard.
You know what? Given what they loaded into this thing, I didn't have a problem with the price. I thought, okay, that sounds about right compared to what other people are putting out there and how they're pricing. This sounds pretty nice. It for what it is, it's actually a really nice device. It looks great. Yes. They put in a couple of extra bells and whistles that, I thought, okay, well, that makes you look less like a robot when you wear it. That's kind of nice. But, I think this is all about content. And, at the end of the day, people don't buy devices, they buy experiences. If you buy a headset that costs $3,500 or $4,000 or $1,000, if the experiences that you can have through that device are not compelling, it doesn't matter how much you pay for these things. And going back to this, what I said earlier, were they solving a problem? They mentioned the Disney thing. They didn't talk about ESPN, but Apple has Apple TV Plus with more and more sports content. They have Apple Music with now live concerts, right? These, special events. I think they're called like Apple Music concerts or something like that. With award-winning artists. They have classical now. So they have all the content production studios at the pro level, at the massive media level. They have award-winning shows. I mean, can you think about? Can you imagine Ted Lasso?
The relationship with Disney?
Immersive. Immersive Ted Lasso standing next to Roy Kent when he goes. You know what I'm saying? Come on. That's priceless right there. Just for that, I would pay $3,500 for those headsets.
It's going to be cool. And I'm going to have to run in about 30 seconds.
Sure.
But I think, my net, I was impressed. We'll see what happens. Maybe we can all both
see what happens.
But I think, let me put it this way. When they bring it into the Apple Store, they'll sell 100,000 in the first week just for people who want to get their hands on it and play with it. But but I appreciate your time, Leonard. This was great. I appreciate it. And I will invite you on my next podcast.
Okay. All right. Well, so Mark, thank you so much for joining this episode of reThink. Really appreciate your expertise. The very profound perspective that you've shared on a company that you've tracked for a long time. And why don't you tell our audience really quickly how they can get in touch with you?
They can follow me at Mark Vena Tech Guy on Twitter. I have the SmartTech Check podcast on YouTube. And if you just Google SmartTech Research, you'll see my website and all the other fun stuff. But it was great. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel here at reThink. And then also check out our research at www.next-curve.com. It's the one-stop shop for all Next Curve's research and all my opinings. And you'll be notified of any new things that we publish. And, until next time, stay healthy. Mark, once again, thank you so much. We'll have to do this again.
Have a great weekend. Thanks, Leonard.
Take care.